Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this morning's latest installment of Impero Talks. I'm Corus from Impero, and taking you through today's presentation is our Chief Strategy Officer, Chris Tyus. So this week we're focusing on the dairy category. We're taking a closer look at how consumers' needs have changed through COVID and how the perception is changing between dairy and dairy alternative products. So thanks very much for sharing some of your key challenges when you registered. If we've not touched on them in this presentation, then don't hesitate to add a question in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom panel, as we'll be taking questions at the end. So I'm going to move swiftly on and allow Chris to kick straight in. And as I said, remember, please feel free just to chip in with any questions, and we'll have a time at the end just to go through those. Thanks very much. Over to you, Chris.
Great. Good morning, everyone. So we've got a lot of interesting things to share with everyone today, or at least I hope you'll find them somewhat interesting. We're talking about all of dairy, so dairy alternatives, and then we're kind of touching on some of the subcategories. So obviously all of these points won't be relevant for some of the subsectors, but as Corus said, feel free to follow up with us in more detail if any of this is of interest. So we're kind of talking about an interesting subject. We're talking about post-COVID and what that future looks like for dairy. And it's quite difficult. Obviously, we don't know what's happening with COVID, but we do know that we've seen new behaviours during when we've been in lockdown. And what we are trying to do in this presentation is, let's call it speculate, using an evidence-based approach on what the future might look like for dairy, and to start to draw out some meaning and learnings, and using a relatively scientific approach. So the honest answer is, like, we don't have a crystal ball. We might be right on, I don't know, let's say half of these things, maybe less. But we think maybe being half right is better than just reacting to the given situation. So the way we've approached this is using a couple of tools, because we don't have the crystal ball. So the first thing we have got as a creative agency, and we use this to solve problems for our clients, and whether that's in the FMCG sector or in the alcohol, and so on and so forth. But we use a tool we've developed that's a trend prediction mapping tool. And what this does is it looks at about 400,000 micro-influencers. And what we do is we continually measure their behavior and look at what they're doing. And why we do this is these are the kind of early adopters. So these are the people that are kind of on the cusp of change and an indicator of how other consumers might follow. The reason why we use micro-influencers is they tend not to be paid by brands. So they're not influenced by what brands want them to do. They're kind of free spirits. And then we apply some predictive analytics to kind of indicate whether the trend that we're seeing is likely to increase or decrease. This gives us a kind of propensity mapping score that understands the likelihood for this to continue. And then the second thing we do is we talk to real consumers. So we've been sort of living with 15 households over the last few weeks across a range of demographics to kind of understand the why behind the data. So when we look at predictive tools, they just tell us sometimes what's happening. They don't tell us why it's happening. So what we've been doing is kind of exploring themes with consumers to understand, why is this behavior happening? What does it mean to them? And to kind of bring that to life. So we're going to be looking today at really two big areas. The first is purchase habits within dairy. And I should say, when I mention the word dairy, just to save myself a few words in this talk, I mean dairy and non-dairy and plant-based, and the kind of the encompassing category. Otherwise, I'll add too many words to every sentence. And the second is health. And within each of these two key focuses today, I'm going to introduce a number of key trends, potential hypotheses and opportunities for dairy brands to consider. So the first I want to look at is purchase habits. So the first one we call this is back to convenience. And I don't know about you, but at the beginning of lockdown, I was baking like crazy. I got pretty good at sourdough pizza and bread. Things like banana bread were right up there. 45,000 new photos popped up to Instagram in just 1 month alone. And we started to enjoy kind of wholesomeness. And, this gave us a feeling of control, but it also helped us to kind of remember better times. We were thinking about safer, happier places from our childhoods, from our grandmas, our era. And we had the time to do this. And what we see now, and this is some data from Kantar, and you guys will probably see this data yourself, that we kind of shifted to less frequent shops. So we were, doing bigger shops, spending a bit more. And the data for Kantar kind of predicts somewhere around October, we might be back to normal if the trends continue. Now, we can't predict exactly what will happen. Who knows what will happen with COVID, the government's regulations. But we see that convenience-based shopping is kind of changing back to how it was. And when we look at some of our predictive tools, and hopefully some of these, it's a little bit of a creative narrative I'm telling you, lots of different points, and they will come to a conclusion at the end of each section of why I'm showing all of these things. But when we looked at our predictive analytics tools, we noticed that freezer food has steadily been in growth in the last 18 months. And people kind of, baking cakes and sticking them in the back of the freezer, or, a plant-based ice cream. And, they love the scoopability from the freezer, this idea that it's convenient and an easy way to consume. And we can see that in forecast this freezer-based kind of interest is going to increase in the future. And when we spoke to kind of consumers, what we noticed is that as people return from furlough, they're starting to see their friends. They've got less need for distractions, and they've got less time. And you start of, things like, I started lockdown baking everything from scratch. Since I've come back from furlough, even though it's only part-time, I've swung way more back to convenience. And this lady was, I think, talking about baking and banana bread, I think was her favorite, about, she's got no time to bake banana bread now. And this idea that, I was eating natural, but now actually I'm just snacking like a teenager again. And what this starts to lead us to is, one of the first things is, convenience is going to start to creep back into our lives. And we know that plant-based is obviously a huge trend. And I think you could start to see more plant-based alternatives being consumed in a more ready-to-eat drink kind of format, more convenient forms. And that assumes commuter life might return, and maybe not to the same degree, but maybe post December, we can anticipate that would happen. So the tension that we kind of uncovered within this trend of convenience is, I want this taste and feeling of homemade, but the reality is post-COVID, I just don't have the time to make from scratch. And specifically within us Brits, and this is probably true of some markets across Europe as well, but specifically Britain, work-life balance has just worsened because of the difficulty to switch off. So we think there's a really big opportunity for dairy brands to bring what we call home-style goodness into everyday occasions. And when we looked at our predictive tool, we noticed that interest in wholesome has kind of surged in the last 18 months. And we kind of forecast that to really increase post-December and moving forward. So to bring that to a couple of key takeouts on the key trends, I think the first is around heritage dairy brands. So maybe some of the forgotten dusty brands in your portfolios. I think there's a real opportunity for them to tell the heritage story, to remind us of, grandma's recipe when times were better, and bring that wholesomeness back into the consumer's kind of psyche now that they're kind of time poor. I think there's a real opportunity to dial up what I would call traditional recipes and ingredients. So kind of firm favorites or even forgotten favorites in how we talk about our ingredients and our products. And the third is around a communication strategy. So clearly homemade goodness is a big opportunity, as we've described, but I think there's a real interesting opportunity to focus on the switch off moment as people have become time poor but demand more in their life, and as life work balance becomes difficult, kind of owning switch off from a dairy point of view, I think is a really interesting opportunity. So that's the first trend. We're on to the second trend now within purchase habits that we call fridge wars. It hasn't been made into a movie, of course, yet. But what we're talking about is we've been forced together. We've spent more time in our homes and more time with people in our homes. That's the reality. We've been with our friends, our family, and it's created this, what we call precious little me time. And when we look at this again through predictive analytics, what we see is kind of me time is in significant decline during COVID. We've been crushed together, and finding that space in your house when you can even just make a Zoom call seems difficult. But even to have that 10-minute piece, that respite in the day. Life's got very, very busy inside our homes, and me time has kind of evaporated. And when we spoke to consumers, what we noticed is this kind of people becoming a lot more territorial over things and objects, but also the food that they eat. I'll buy you whatever you want, but this is mine. This isn't a sharing thing. This is mine. And you notice this within when people are having to balance food for different family groups as well. I'll buy vegan ice cream for her and non-vegan for me, so I don't have to worry about sharing. And you kind of see this as this kind of generational families under one roof makes kind of shopping for different dietary needs even more important. We kind of speculate, pre-COVID, if you had someone in your family that had different dietary needs, they could go out and buy that themselves. That was a lot easier. But now we've gone back to the bigger shop, as we've talked about. You've kind of had to cater for your whole family more holistically. And people are kind of having to juggle the stress of less me time, but equally the need to cater for everyone else. And you see this within kind of cooking with dairy. I'll make one pasta bake, but I'll do half dairy and one half non-dairy. And you're kind of seeing people having to split their dietary requirements across their family needs. So the tension that we kind of uncovered is I want food for me while keeping the family happy. So there is this underlying kind of, I would call it a selfishness that's kind of crept into our lives by being forced together. But I've equally got a job to do with my family. And I think I just draw a note to a couple of brands from sort of past and present. So Flora just released its kind of plant-based product under its mother brand. I think the rainbow ice cream was from Aldi or Lidl, I forget which one, and really kind of targeting a specific buyer. And this powerful yogurt was from a few years ago and really targeted at kind of guys and kind of protein focused. And the reason why I think this is more kind of interesting now is about owning this new, it's my time. It's far more selfish than me time. It means products for me as opposed to just everyone. And to give you what that might mean as a takeout, that I think because we've got to cater for everyone in our family, I think what Flora's done in terms of brand stretch is quite a smart move. So if you're a non-dairy brand, or if you're a dairy brand, stretching into non-dairy is a quite strong move because it makes it easy for people to purchase. As I mentioned, from a kind of communication strategy point of view, the my time might be a really interesting area to explore for some brands. And then the third is the struggle to differentiate within the dairy sector. Many brands look and feel and act the same. And I think within this selfish behavior we're seeing, there's this opportunity to kind of really segment products and brands against specific audiences' needs and moods, as we saw in the kind of 3 examples I kind of shared before, and really get super focused on, rather than making a dairy product for everyone, making it for someone. So the third trend, we call this treat yourself. So in the 2018 financial crash, peanut butter sales went up by 9%. And I find this fascinating. I was always intrigued by why this was. And it's because it's a relatively inexpensive source of protein. It's a cheap treat is the reason why it went up. And I've been a big fan of kind of leading indicators in the world that kind of help us make sense of things. And peanut butter is one of those leading indicators. Typically, when peanut butter sales goes up, is an indicator of tougher times. And for those that are eagle-eyed this morning, I wrote this a week or two ago, this deck. So I thought I was being smart when I wrote it. But for those of you who saw the paper this morning, we're now, in the UK at least, classified as a recession with 2 consecutive quarters of reduced GDP. And you can see, in this data using predictive analytics, this is what we can see. We can see that peanut butter sales are, during COVID, have rapidly increased as people look for an affordable treat that's high in protein. And again, our predictive model indicates that this is really going to shoot up. And as the data from recession starts to confirm that, there will be an interesting opportunity for brands of how we thrive in that marketplace. I kind of want to introduce the idea of snacking within kind of tougher times. So snacking's been growing by 55% in the last 18 months. And this idea of mini treats has kind of crept into our lives, kind of, again, pushed through from COVID, but was already growing during that time anyhow. And this idea of quite indulgent mini treats, and some of these aren't that mini actually, but, I've got a teaspoon of peanut butter and a large spoonful of coconut yogurt, crunchy peanut butter and chocolate porridge. So we see snacking as becoming this interesting trend. And when we spoke to consumers, we found that people are treating themselves inside their home. So we're starting to see sort of recession type behavior about affordability and weighing up options of, if I go out for a walk, I'm going to take my own coffee with me. I'm just off buying things. Or the oat barista version, it's just so much cheaper to make at home. And within kind of treating and this sort of recession behavior, it's not pure indulgence. There's a health component to this as well. So yogurt bowl, this sort of massive trend of, I start my day in a massively healthy way is really prevalent. And I think this, the quote on the right here, tropical vibes, yogurt bowl with coconut, Greek yogurt, banana and pineapple left over from taco night. So it's really showing us, I want to be healthy, but I'm being mindful of my cost as well. And that's becoming something people want to talk about. I understand that the economy is under stress, and therefore being a smart, savvy chef or a home, preparing at home becomes increasingly important. So the tension we discovered is I want this affordability and guilt-free, but I want this taste and style of indulgence. I don't want to be thrifty and not enjoy my food. I want to be thrifty and have a great experience. So we call this opportunity finding the new balance. And what we mean by that, there's 3 key takeouts. And they're almost all interlinked. They should really be one umbrella, and they're all interconnected. So people are, if we have entered a recession, what we think people will be looking for is affordability, small, and they want it to be luxurious, just like protein is in peanut butter, but they want it to be healthy. And dairy brands that can master those 3 things together will probably look to do very well. So on to health, huge topic. And the first one we want to introduce that was derived from COVID is new to exercising. So in May 2020, there was globally about 2 million meals that were consumed for health compared to the same period last year. So we suddenly tried to eat healthier. And I want to talk here in this section about mental health and physical health. And I think Vice really articulates it brilliantly. This is, poor mental health isn't just about Gen Y and Gen Z, but because they're increasingly connected and stuck online 24/7. And again, I think Vice articulates it well. They're kind of using drugs and a kind of digital dystopia to kind of cope with that tension of physical and mental health. And even prior to COVID, mental health was kind of on the rise. So searches for anxiety increased by 50% since 2015. And again, if we look at some of our predictive data, we can see it's going to increase by 21% in the last 6 months. And you can see there during COVID, it really spikes. And during COVID, about 31% of the UK population tried an online fitness class. And you get this real sense that now people are trying to be healthier than ever, or at least giving it a go. Going for a walk helps me signify the end of the day. Or, within dairy, I just got rid of milk completely. The point was to lose weight. So the perception in this instance is that, exercising is good, but, some dairy is bad for you. And what's really interesting is we had a great go at home workouts, but what we see is the trend's massively in decline. So people have kind of got bored with this fad of home workouts, and as gyms start to open up, people are going to go somewhat back to normality, a bit like the convenience trend that we saw before. And obviously some people will carry on with the home workouts, but no way to the same degree that 31% of the country was doing so before. And what we noticed when we spoke to consumers, that this active lifestyle is kind of piquing an interest in energy and protein claims. So we explored some previous and current TV ads with some consumers around dairy. And it's kind of, some of the techniques here are really working. The known athletes, this idea of health, and it feels like you're going for a run, or, I understand that protein is on the label is important for me. So you get a sense that people are starting to understand health and becoming more health conscious, even though ideas like online fitness are in decline. And I guess this is a really important topic that, the reality is children or mini children in UK and other markets around Europe have been stuck inside. And typically what happens when children are stuck inside during summer holidays, they put on weight. So summer holidays are normally 6 weeks. And if you compare that to in the UK, we've been in lockdown for 6 months. Children haven't had education. So we've put on considerably more weight during the lockdown process for children. And what happens normally is they then maintain that weight during the school term as they grow. So they put on weight and then grow, and that's okay. But what we can anticipate is we put on a lot more weight during this time. So we think that the tension here is COVID has created a more stress and weight for me and my family. And I think what we're going to see is they're going to look to find simple switches to make a change in their lifestyles. So the opportunity is what we call restorative foods and drinks. And this is about bringing both the body and mind back to health. Kombucha, I think, is one example of a brand that people are starting to understand the health benefits of these new drinks that are actually getting a lot more fame and attention than the dairy category itself. And there's no reason why dairy can't do it as well. So I think there's 3 takeouts from this section. I think child-focused health will become increasingly important. The government is going to push that agenda, I think, moving forward, and how dairy brands can have a role in that will be incredibly important. The simple switches that people are going to be looking for, they want simple, easy choices to make that make lives a bit easier. And the third is, again, this might be purpose-driven or communication-driven, but both mental and physical health represent strong opportunities for dairy. The second trend I want to introduce within the health section is what we call enrichment and taste. And it's a little bit of a complicated area that we've kind of mashed together, but hopefully you'll follow me through it. So what we noticed during COVID is, within a retail perspective, sales of fruit and vegetables massively increased. So there was a 100% increase in Germany in fresh fruit sales during COVID. And then in Swiss retailers, they reported a 60% surge greater than normal. And what we, again, saw within our predictive analytics is that kind of wholesome fruit and seeds are kind of growing interest. So it's not the new, crazy berries and the new really unusual fruit and seeds that are really kind of piquing people's interest. It's the more traditional. So blueberry up 73%, banana 61%, and flaxseed 63%. So people are really starting to use these within their daily life, and they're starting to understand the health benefits of this. And when we explored this with kind of consumers, what we saw is this very traditional idea, at least in the UK, of a portion of fruit or 5 a day still resonates. This idea, I need to get my fruit somehow into my diet. And dairy being a great way, a great combination. And so people really homed in on, when we explored mood boards and visuals, people really homed in on, it's just the simple fruits that people kind of understood and thought that they were good for them. And we saw this interest more in fruit versus awareness of sugar. And when we flip this onto kind of plant-based, they've become obviously mainstream. We'll talk a bit about that in a sec. But they're considered kind of lower in fat, but there's a taste issue. So it tastes okay, but I drink it to be healthy. Or when I make a protein shake, I avoid using cow's milk. So people have got this perception, at least within traditional dairy and milk, that it's unhealthy, but it kind of struggles within taste profiles for certain situations. And hopefully, if you stay with me, I'll join up all these dots in a second at the very end. What we noticed that is vitamins are growing. So within this idea of health, this idea of certain vitamins being popular, and kind of fruit, kind of understanding that, being part of that connection. So vitamins as kind of pills being less of a thing, but vitamin is in natural becoming very popular. And within gut health, there's a huge interest in this, but I think it's the new entrants that are generating all the attention. So comparatively to dairy that probably owned gut health maybe in the early days, again, kombucha is doing a great job in generating that attention of gut strategy. And this switch that we're seeing within kind of enrichment is what we call from like a pill culture of the past to creating beautiful rituals. So boosting yourself with vitamins isn't kind of a thing that you do in the cupboard of your house and kind of hide it away. It tends to be more celebrated, more explored. I love this quote from a consumer: vitamin D dose after 55 days of locked inside. This is obviously an Instagrammer that really wants to express how they feel about a vitamin, but it really shows that vitamins or enrichment is beautiful rather than pill-like. And we noticed that while there's inward health, and as I've talked about, sort of gut and things like that, there's this kind of rising understanding of kind of outward health. So skin health was talked about a lot, and this, things like antioxidants is increasing by 19%. This water brand here really focusing in and homing on this specific, challenge around of antioxidants. So what we're noticing is this tension in life, and hopefully these points will start to join up, is I want a sort of targeted specific health areas, but I still want familiarity. I still want blueberries and strawberries because I understand them and I don't want to be wasteful, but I do want to start targeting if I've got gut issues, if I've got skin issues, if I want to change certain areas in my life, I want to focus in on them. So the opportunity is, we think it's about feeling healthy on the inside, which is obviously being communicated a lot within dairy, but there's this idea of the outside that's becoming more important, this sort of outwardly facing idea of health. So the three takeouts that we have is classic fruits are really understood to be healthy and act as a familiar favorite, this idea of less waste. The second is enrichment claims that's kind of starting to cut through, but we really think there's a job to be done around generating new news. So a lot of other adjacent categories are doing far better at creating standout than the dairy category, and finding that way to communicate it as an exciting new alternative to consumers. And the third, as I've mentioned, is about targeting specific health areas. So a little bit before, when we're talking about be a brand for someone rather than everyone, I think the same is true in health. So the third trend within health that we're going to look at is healthy satisfaction. So I'm just going to tell you a little story about McDonald's and how they sold more milkshakes. And I think it's a really interesting story within healthy satisfaction. So McDonald's wanted to understand, how to generate more sales from one of its core products. And what they did is they were thinking, do we make them bigger? Do we make them smaller? Do we make them colder? What do we do to sell more milkshakes? Do we need new flavors? What is it? They tried a bunch of things, didn't really work. What they then did is they kind of looked at the data and they noticed that there was a pattern of consumers that were coming in about 11 o'clock and about 3 o'clock and just buying a milkshake. And they wanted to know, why are these kind of super fans of milkshakes just buying one thing? Why aren't they buying some fries and burgers? So they identified this segment, and it turned out it was white van men, people on the road that were going on long journeys. I'm stopping off to fuel up, and I'm gonna be stuck on the road for 2 or 3 hours. And they spoke to these guys and said, why are you buying milkshakes? What is it about milkshakes? And they discovered 2 things or 3 things. First is the journey was long and boring. A bit like our days, you could argue, within COVID. It's a long old day during being locked in. So they discovered that. The second thing they discovered is that consumers needed something to keep them kind of entertained and in a longer sense of enjoyment, to keep them, distracted from the long drive. And the third thing they discovered is they were buying the milkshakes to kind of break up the serendipity, the long drive. So it gave satisfaction, but it was breaking up the journey as well. So McDonald's did 2 things really cleverly to change its products, and then rolled this out across the entire state, all of their franchisees across the world. 2 things they did were really clever. The first thing they did is they made the milkshake thicker. If you've ever had a McDonald's milkshake, you'll notice it requires a super amount of power in your mouth to actually suck the liquid up. And the reason why they did that was to make the satisfaction last longer. And then the second thing they did was add fruit. And it wasn't just a health concern to add fruit. The reason why they did that was to add that serendipity back in. If we could make it feel like a bit more exciting, that you just got something that you weren't expecting in your mouth, then that would create a bit of a distraction from the long drive. So it's a really great story about how McDonald's, within their dairy products, had kind of figured out a way for understanding consumer needs. And hopefully this story will become clear at the end of why I'm telling you this. So what we noticed within our predictive analytics is dieting is becoming, it's kind of fading out. So, people don't want to go on diets anymore. They kind of want to live healthy. And we kind of predict this is going to continue for some time. And what we see kind of surging is this idea of meal prep. 31% up in the last 6 months, making your meals for the week. And you'd be amazed now if once I've said this, and you'll know someone that's doing this and go, oh, maybe I'll give this a try. And you can see this idea of organization within health being more important than going on a fad of a diet. And when we spoke to consumers, what we noticed within dairy is they're kind of skipping meals, and they're using dairy and plant-based dairy as an alternative to meals. So linking back to the McDonald's story, they're having a thick yogurt that fills you up to dinner, or they're going to make a milkshake and then skip lunch. It was just after the financial crash of 2008, M&S launched Simply Fuller for Longer. It's actually been rebadged now because they couldn't use the name. And the insight there was simple. Losing weight should be simple. And all you need to do is just eat less calories. And so if we could make people fuller, they wouldn't necessarily have to consume as many calories, and therefore providing a great alternative to losing weight and going on diets. Now, it's a little bit of a jump from where I was, so forgive me, but it will make sense in a second. I just want to flip to protein drinks. And what protein drinks are doing is understanding that I aim typically at Instagram generation, and they understand how they need to make their products look beautiful to get kind of featured. And you get this idea that look is more important than taste. So back, Gen Y, Gen Z, this is specifically important. They would almost rather drink something that tastes rancid but looked great than tasted great but no one engaged with in social. So the look of something becomes really, really important. And to start to put this all together is the tension that we see within this idea of kind of health is I want to be healthy so that I'm not hungry, and I don't want to think about it, and I want to look good. And the reason why I've kind of told you quite disparate stories is this idea of this consumer just wants it all. They don't want to make a sacrifice if they can. Looking good is so important, but they want the idea of easy switches to health, a bit like McDonald's did. So it's got to be easy, but I also want to add more enjoyment into my life. I want that serendipity. I want that thicker suck. And therefore we call this opportunity, I want it all. So the key takeouts that I would give you, and there's quite a lot in here to dissect just inside 45 minutes or so, but I'd really start to think about fuller for longer. So not diet, but this is longer satisfaction that people can feel healthy. And then the second thing I think dairy really needs to consider is how to be more Instagram worthy. I think the protein brands are starting to do it well, but if we look at adjacent categories like alcohol, for instance, they're doing a far better job of getting earned media. And I think yogurt could have its time in the sun to really think about this. So quick recap, everyone. We've touched on purchase habits, 3 trends, back to convenience, the fridge wars, and treat yourself. The second is the health, new to exercising, enrichment and taste, and finally, healthy satisfaction. I've got one final thought that didn't really fit with everything else I said, but I just couldn't walk away from day without sharing it. But there's a really big challenge within the dairy category. Most dairy and non-dairy brands all play to the same category codes. Most have the same brand archetypes, if you're familiar with that strategic planning tool. And therefore, most have the same personality. And fundamentally, we think that the dairy category lacks differentiation. There's only a few brands that have kind of broken the mold, and standing out, before shelf and at shelf is critically important in purchase decision. And we think there's a real opportunity to differentiate. So, we're Impero. We are the creative agency for impatient brands. We normally go into categories with our clients, we disrupt, and we kind of create culturally relevant brands. If you're Coris, I'll probably hand back to you now just on some of the other things we've been up to during agency life during COVID, and just let you talk about these.
Great, thanks very much, Chris. I just want to touch on some past talks, but I've got some questions for you, and there is a question in the chat, and so we'll come to those in a minute. So just a reminder, please, chuck in any questions you have. But just a quick reminder of past talks we've done, everything from talking about engaging Gen Z, which is a target audience we often kind of look to communicate with, to doing a talk on how to deliver or deploy a very successful NPD launch, and all the others that you see there. So if any of those topics on the screen are of interest to you and your brand teams, you'd like us to kind of re-deliver these talks just for you guys internally, then please drop me an email at coris@weimpero.com. Likewise, based on anything you've heard today from Chris, he's carried out a lot of research into this and has chopped it right down just for the sake of this presentation, but there's a lot of other info surrounding this which he's uncovered. So if you'd like to carry on the conversation and find out about other parts, then please get in touch with us and we'd be happy to carry on that conversation. So I've got a couple of questions, but I think it's worth taking the first one here that's been put into the chat from Gillian Grattan. She said, I'm in the process of organising a virtual fitness event for the National Dairy Council in Ireland. Do you think the uptake will be a lot lower than a public outdoor event, even when there's a risk of a second wave? So I think that really touches upon, the trends that you were talking about earlier on in terms of fitness at home, and is it going to carry on, or will there be kind of an uptake if we do in fact show signs of a second wave? We've seen that in other parts of the world. Even I think I read this morning, New Zealand, after a really long stint of being case free, that's now showing 4 signs. So yeah, it's a great question. So I can answer it more from other sectors. So music has tried to do this a lot, virtual festivals. And the data that I've seen around the world is people are
are getting a little bit fatigued of virtual experiences. So, if I use the online fitness, 31% surge in the UK population taking part, and then we see a massive drop off now that interest is weighing on this idea of spending so much time on our computers. So I think if we look at the data, it doesn't look great. I have seen very successful examples within music about talking about reminding people of the legacy of things. So harking back to when days were freer and days were better, and tapping into that emotion has been very successful. I think if you can do it with purpose about, why are you doing this virtual fitness event with the National Dairy Council? What's the purpose of it? And tap into maybe a deeper emotion, because there's obviously plenty of fitness things people could do. It's how you cut through. So I think it's a creative challenge to answer, but I would be certainly wary about virtual events at the moment. I think it's okay within the business sector, but potentially on the consumer side, I think people are let's be honest, we're all business people, but we're all consumers as well. So at the end of the day, does anyone want to jump on another call to do something, or would we actually just want to find some me time, or my time as we call it, and break from our sort of digital fatigue that we're suffering?
Cool. There's been some continued chat in the on this topic about why Gillian's doing that, about health and well-being and getting mentally ready for lockdown again, possibly, if that is indeed the case. So one of the questions I had was just, are there any nuances, I guess, is the way to describe it? Does dairy differ from the other categories where alternatives where we're seeing a rise in alternatives, such as, obviously alcohol comes to mind with the no-low category it's happening there. I think just yesterday I saw an article around Heineken just doing a massive push with their 0% product, 0.0, to sponsor sports next year. And then there's obviously meat-free burgers that have seen a big rise. So does dairy differ in any way, or are there any nuances for the dairy, or overall is it just showing a big a mindset change?
Yeah. So I think, let's just take meat-free as an example. I think meat-free was fringe, being vegan or vegetarian or flexitarian was kind of a niche thing 2 or 3 years ago, and it's been growing steadily every single year, concreted in things like January and that kind of create a moment around it. I think we're certainly seeing a tipping point that it's become not just for people that are thinking about it for dietary reasons, but changing their lifestyles. So this is, I want to be healthy. It's not that I've got an allergy to meat, or or I think it's morally wrong, but I perceive that, let's call them the traditional categories like meat and alcohol, are more unhealthy. So there's a real big battle for all traditional categories to overcome this. And I think one of the ways they can do that is taste. That seems to be the weakness of non-dairy brands and non-meat brands, but that's going to continue to increase. So they're going to continue to innovate in that space. And if we just stay focused on taste, we won't win. So I think the counter argument to the non-dairy alternatives is about enrichment. So to show that we're adding stuff, and things like calcium and vitamin D really resonate with consumers. And there's an understanding that some traditional can be healthy, especially when it's enhanced. But there's no doubt that every, let's say, alcohol that we work with a lot, every alcohol brand is expecting over the next 5 years a dramatic proportion of their sales to come from no and low alcohol. And I think the same should be true of dairy. And especially we see that within multi-generational households now, where you've got this idea, I've got someone that eats meat and someone that doesn't, or someone that, has this allergy. People are, while they're sharing and splitting meals, they're actually trying these products. And if they can be if they can hit the taste profiles for certain instances, like the Oatly barista product, people are happy to make the switch if there's no downside on taste. And because we've got bigger families living together, I think that will become more and more prevalent.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly anecdotally just share from my personal experience. I've got 3 kids. My daughter is dairy intolerant, and so that means we've been buying oat milk for like nearly 12 years now, maybe less, maybe 11 years, and it's now got to the point where regular dairy milk probably constitutes 10%, maybe 15% of the dairy intake, because all 3 of my kids have oat milk for breakfast now, and even I've started adding it to my coffees in the morning. So it's gradually kind of getting less and less, presence in the fridge, so to speak. So and already my daughter's 13, and she's talking about how we need to eat less meat, and so I personally can see that shift happening. So it's very interesting. Just another question in the chat saying I think it's interesting. Something we should consider from James Pearson saying, are you looking to do a follow-up around attitudes towards sustainability, in particular homegrown? I think we very much could do.
Yeah, we certainly could. Yeah. So I guess the interesting thing about our predictive analytics tool is it's always listening. It's actually relatively easy to pull data and understand what's going on. And then, as you see, we combine that up with sort of deeper look at consumer understanding. We've done a lot of work in sustainability for the beer category and understanding what elements of sustainability drive interest, because not all are equal for all segments. So some issues and concerns are greater, let's say, for mums versus, let's say, Gen Z. So a lot of brands trying to align to a specific sustainability area, and it's kind of it's about, when we think about which brands should align to them, it's about making sure we pick the right ones. Ultimately, sustainability is a green fee now. Every consumer is expecting brands to become more sustainable, but picking the ones that you have a right to play, and the ones that are believable and meaningful for the consumers that you're considering.
Yeah, great. So James, certainly we'd be happy to do that. I'll be in touch with you afterwards. I've one final question from me, just because you touched on it, and I think it warrants a bit of a chat around this. You mentioned about standout in that last slide. You've got the photograph of the dairy aisle, and obviously we've talked about dairy alternatives, and Oatly being the one which obviously springs to mind. I was chatting this weekend with my sister, and she kind of like just sang its praise for about 30 minutes, just talking about how she likes to turn around every corner of the bottle just to make sure she's not missing something. And obviously we've seen their standout out of home campaigns. Is it literally just, is the job easy to stand out, or do you what's your take on that, Chris? Can you elaborate on why you think it's doing such a good job at cutting through?
Yeah. So, I mean, they're doing a great job of cutting through, because I think they're taking a really creative and brave approach to their marketing communication. They are not making adverts; they're making news. They're creating things that people want to talk about. And there's having seen the creative director speak from Oatly a few times, he was given a lot of creative freedom and to kind of break the rules of the category. And I think dairy is one of the sectors that is there's a lot of research behind it, and the more a category gets cluttered, the more research goes into it to understand what people are thinking, like we're doing right now. I think the real opportunity is, once you've seen all the research, is to pick some rules and break them, and therefore differentiate yourself from the competitor set. Because if you follow all the conventions, we'll all ultimately end up in the same place. So the real art within any category is to understand which conventions we should break, and for what consumer. So I think that's what Oatly have done. I'm going to say stumbled upon, because they just gave a lot of creative freedom to all conventions. But I think, it doesn't matter what dairy brand you are. I think there's great opportunities to create differentiation by defining the brand archetype stronger, and making sure you understand the positioning within the marketplace, which sounds obvious, but there's so many brands that all sit in the same place. And I can, from the research that we did, and it's not extensive in terms of consumer groups, and I'm sure a lot of people see this in their own research, the amount of people that just couldn't remember a dairy brand that they ate at home, or if they could, they just couldn't even pronounce its name. Very, very few people had the ability to have immediate recall. Prompted recall was a lot better. And that's because that would indicate to me there's just a lack of difference within the marketplace. And I'm sure you see that through your own brand scores and trackers that you do.
Great. Well, I think this is a good time. There are no more questions that are coming through, so I think it's probably a good time to close the session. Thanks to all the people who have joined. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact myself or Chris on LinkedIn or on email. My email is chorus@weareimpero.com, and Chris is chris.tyas, Tyas, @weareimpero.com. And that's it. So thanks again for joining.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers. Have a great day.
Cheers.